Nathan Cross checked his reflection in the small mirror above the restrooms, straightened his tie for the third time, and tried to remember the last moment he'd felt genuinely unprepared. He couldn't find one. Years of negotiations, presentations, and carefully rehearsed confidence had a way of smoothing out the rough edges. Tonight, of all things, he had allowed his sister to set him up on a blind date. It had been framed as harmless. A quiet restaurant, someone to talk to, an interruption to the routine that had become his life since the divorce. The restaurant was warm and low-lit, the kind of place where conversations leaned in and cell phones stayed face down. Nathan sat at the table near the window, hands folded, the city noise muted to a soft hum. He watched a woman at the bar laugh with a friend. He watched the server pour wine with the same deliberate care he brought to client meetings. He felt small, in the way only a man who had built his world on schedules and outcomes could feel, as if tonight might offer him something he hadn't calculated. An honest connection, perhaps. When Emma walked in, it took him a second to reconcile memory with the woman before him. She was younger in his recollection. One summer, a laugh, a pair of borrowed books, but she had aged into someone precise and controlled, with a steady line at the jaw and eyes that seemed accustomed to looking for what needed to be carried. She wore a coat that suggested practicality before fashion. She smiled, and it was quiet, as if she'd learned the economy of expression. They started with the safe things, careers, the awkward taxonomy of modern dating, the small talk that feels like scaffolding. Conversation eased. Then, without theatrics, Emma anchored the past into the present. "You remember that summer?" she asked. He did. He remembered the lake, the rented boat, the weathered dock where she taught him to carve initials with a pocket knife. He remembered thinking then that the future felt like an open field. He thought of how effortless it all had seemed. "I never expected to run into you again," she said. Her fingers tapped the stem of her glass. "I didn't want to make it awkward, but there's something you should know." Nathan braced. He told himself to stay calm, to keep his voice measured. She took a breath and said it straight, without flourish. "You have a son. He's 17. His name is Marcus." The sentence landed like a dropped tray. For a moment, the restaurant existed as a split frame, their table and the world that had kept rolling while he unknowingly lived in the center of a story he hadn't known he was part of. He tasted the metal of panic in his mouth. "That can't be." He stopped. He wanted to call it an impossibility, and then realized how flimsy that felt. Their relationship had not been a secret affair. It had been a summer, but time had grown teeth. Emma's voice was steady. "I didn't tell you because your mother wanted to protect you. She said it would ruin things. I didn't know how to make you believe me, Nathan, so I kept it to myself. Everyone believed the lie, that the past could be shelved, tidied, and that the consequences could be contained. That was the quiet consensus. Better to hide an inconvenient truth than let it complicate a family name. Better to smooth over an uncomfortable past than face the ripple of responsibility." Nathan felt the lie like cold water down his spine. He stared at Emma and heard Lauren's laugh in his memory, the soft shaking off of any mess that might disrupt the family rhythm. He left the table in a daze and ducked into the men's room. His fingers fumbled through his phone until he found the number for his mother. He had not planned to call her. The dial tone was a small, bright threat. His mother's voice on the line had an attempt at steadiness that did not reach her eyes when he arrived at their house later that night. She had known. She had decided. "I thought it was best for everyone," she said. "It was a mistake, but not the kind to make a scene over. You were 20. You had your life. Lauren stood at the doorway, guilty and nervous in the same breath. Nathan watched her shift from defensiveness to discomfort and back again. She explained that Emma had seemed frightened, that messages that might have connected him to Marcus had been left unanswered because, in her telling, Emma's claim had felt like a storm about to hit an unmoored boat. Their intention had been to protect him. The protection had become a partition. "You hid letters?" Nathan asked. The words were small and precise, like a test. His mother did not hide her shame. "I kept them. I thought I was saving you from pain. I didn't think it would become years." He could see how the protectionism had calcified. He could see how, in the soft generosity of misjudgment, years of absence had been exchanged for comfort. No one had wanted to be cruel. No one had wanted to create a wound. They had wanted to guard. The result was the same. He left his mother's house with something else heavy in his chest, the ledger of years he had not accounted for. Guilt arrived in small measures, at first a hollow thud, then a steady ache. He almost believed the old story, that success could substitute for presence, that if you provided enough, absence could be forgiven. He found himself wanting to reject that lie. He found himself dialing another number, one he hadn't known he would ever dial. Marcus's. The meeting was arranged in the neutral territory of a public park, a bench under trees that still held late summer leaves. Marcus arrived with a backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes wary. He was tall in the way teenagers suddenly are, skeins of muscle and long limbs, but his jaw carried a careful reserve that made him look older. When he offered his hand, it was cautious. Nathan took it. "I don't know what to say," Nathan began. "I should have known. I should have—" Marcus's smile was a brief, skeptical flash. "You think a handshake is going to fix 17 years?" He was right. Nathan did not argue. He sat. He turned his watch face inward, as if time could be read and readjusted like a faulty mechanism. He said, "You deserve to know. I don't expect—" He stopped and started again, choosing words like he used to choose terms in negotiations. Honest, clear, unafraid of smallness. Marcus did not call him father. He used his name, then watched Nathan's face for how it would land. They spoke in fragments at first. School, the small town Marcus had grown up in, Emma's work in a clinic, the classes Marcus liked, math, engines, things that fit together. Nathan listened. His role in this beginning was not to erase the past, but to enter it carefully, as someone who had lived outside of a chapter and was only now stepping inside. There was a small, telling moment when Marcus reached into his backpack and took out a worn mechanical pencil. "My dad taught me practically everything I know about tools," Marcus said, and then corrected himself with a laugh. "I mean, someone did. I figured it out." Nathan noticed his hands. They were like his own, broad, the knuckles with faint scars from minor projects. He felt a sudden, sharp proof. Resemblance that had been denied by silence. He felt the weight of possibilities he'd forfeited, not by choice, but by omission. The first meetings were awkward, then careful, then routine in their own imperfect way. Nathan began by offering practical things, paying for a used car mechanic course, a notebook of tools, and later more formal help with college preparations. He set up a savings account under careful advice from a counselor he knew, not as a cure, but as a practical commitment. He visited the hardware store once with Marcus and bought a cheap set of wrenches, because Marcus had a grin when he clutched them. It was a small proof he could point to when words felt inadequate, but the larger labor was not in funding. It was in the small, repeated acts of showing up. Arriving on time for lunch, staying 15 minutes longer when Marcus hesitated to leave, taking him to see a professor about an engineering summer program. Nathan learned to let silences not be disasters. He learned the arithmetic of patience. He learned that apology without work was simply words. Oliver watched this unfold with the baffled acceptance of a child who had always assumed a certain place in his father's life. He was younger than Marcus by only a few years, but had been raised knowing Nathan as the steady center. Pick-up games, bedtime stories, the rituals of a household without the absence of a different kind of fatherhood. The first meeting between the boys was tentative. Marcus was guarded. Oliver expected everything to fall into the neat contours Nathan had arranged. They played video games that first afternoon. Oliver explained a trick. Marcus scoffed and then showed one of his own. They traded exercises of skill and patience. Nathan watched them from the kitchen doorway, hands folded. He felt like a man watching a scaffolding finally assembled. It was not a triumph, it was a beginning. There were more complicated moments. Emma and Nathan met to talk in a public cafe, not as lovers reopening old grooves, but as adults reconciling the remnant of a past decision. Emma's face tightened around a sadness that was not accusation, but the steady ache of years carried without partner or petition. "I did what I had to do then," she said. "I thought I was protecting you from a storm. I thought I could make it small." Nathan wanted to say that he understood and that understanding would suffice. He saw the tightness at the corner of her mouth. He offered an apology that was not theatrical, simple, specific. "I'm sorry I didn't know. I'm sorry for the years you did this alone." He did not say that this would fix everything. He knew better. He had learned in the early days of this new life that responsibility was slow and patient, earned in increments. Emma nodded. She did not accept absolution with a flourish. She accepted it as one small thing among many. She folded her hands around a mug and said, "Marcus has been angry. He has reasons." That was the crux. Anger as continuity, not explosion. Marcus's indignation at being kept from someone who might have been an ally, at being left with an uneven story, was valid. Nathan contained his impulse to explain, to defend a younger self who had been shaped by people who wanted to protect him and by a mother who had made choices she thought were kind. The lie that everyone believed was visible in the smaller details. Photo albums with blank spaces, holiday stories reframed, a community that had made a quieter narrative around an awkward truth. Nathan began to see how stories are edited, how omission becomes a falsehood by increments. People had not sat down and conspired, they had been coaxed into convenience. But he also saw the cost. Marcus had grown used to reconciling absence with achievement. He had learned to rely on himself. That person, hard and self-sufficient, needed different language than pity. He needed steadiness. Steadiness was what Nathan attempted to offer. He attended parent-teacher nights as a man who had never been a regular. He drove Marcus to a vocational fair and asked questions he didn't think he would know how to ask. He sat in on a study session and pretended to understand calculus long enough to earn a laugh. He signed permission forms, met with counselors, and followed through on small promises, a Saturday at a museum, a chance to shadow a mechanic for a day. Each commitment was a stitch. There were mistakes. He arrived late to one appointment. He forgot to call on a Thursday when Marcus had said he might need a lift. Marcus noticed. He called Nathan out, not angrily, but with the kind of bluntness only a teenager who had learned to rely on himself could muster. "You said you'd be there," he told Nathan. Nathan swallowed. He paid penance by acknowledging the fault and rescheduling with more than the necessary care. It was humbling work. He learned that presence is not a grand gesture, but a sustained ledger of small reliability. Meanwhile, Lauren came to understand the dimension of what she had helped conceal. She watched Marcus across a table at a barbecue and felt sudden shame sharpen into resolve. She began to accompany Nathan to conversations sometimes, offering the kind of awkward apologies that come with learning how to be truly sorry. She did not try to erase herself from the narrative, but tried instead to make space for what had been kept out. There were quieter moments, when the new family shape felt like ordinary life, finally finding a place. One afternoon, Nathan watched Marcus and Oliver in the driveway, basketball thudding against the pavement, sun scudding across their faces. Marcus taught Oliver a move. Oliver imitated it, then added his own. They argued about a rule and then laughed. Nathan felt something like success reframed yet again. Not in deals closed or contracts signed, but in the easy violence of a shared joke over missed shots and ridiculous trash talk. He stood beside Emma on the curb and let the scene flood him with an ache that was both new and old. He had built a life that looked indistinguishable from what many would call success. A firm, a house, a reputation for competence. He realized that each of those things had a cost, sometimes paid by others. Presence, he thought, might be the truest currency. The lie everyone had believed, that the past could be compartmentalized and that absence could be excused by achievement, fell away in the sound of the ball on concrete and the easy bickering of boys who were learning a language of brotherhood. He did not expect forgiveness to be instantaneous. Marcus's trust built in cautious increments, an extra hour at a shop, a late-night text that was not followed by avoidance, a consistent presence on weekends. Emma offered him small measures of acceptance and large measures of caution. She watched his gestures for durability. She allowed him minutes and withheld full embrace until time and steadiness proved him worthy. The work of reparation included practical things. Nathan paid for a summer program's tuition. He helped fund a tutor for calculus. He bought Marcus the old, oil-streaked toolbox Marcus had admired in the shop. He set up a college savings account, not in the theatrical manner of a check being pushed across a table, but quietly and with paperwork that would outlast the next argument. He sat with Marcus and helped him write a personal essay, not by dictating, but by listening. An exercise in coaxing memories into meaning. There were moments when his mother visited and watched from the sidelines, as if at the theatre of her own making. She did not attempt to reclaim the narrative. She had aged into a woman who could see how well-meaning choices could create harm. She tried in small ways, calls that were more frequent, an offer to bring dinner once a week. Those reparative acts were imperfect, but they were real. One evening, months into the fragile pattern, Emma called him and said simply, "The boys are playing at the park tonight." The weather had that late heat softness. Nathan arrived early and found a spot on a bench where he could feel the game without being in it. Marcus and Oliver were already arguing over teams, the kind of childish coalition-making that felt sacred. They played for an hour, then two. The park had that slippery light where the sun begins to spill gold. Nathan watched them run, saw Marcus call a play and Oliver answer it with a grin. The ball squeaked against sneakers. Parents watched from a distance, the small soap opera of neighborhood life playing itself out. Nathan realized slowly that something else had shifted beneath his ribs. It wasn't redemption complete. It wasn't a photograph of a family made whole in a single frame. It was the sense that he was present when it mattered, that he had traded some of the sleekness of professional accomplishment for the mess and grit of a life that required him. Emma stood beside him, arms crossed, the way someone watches a fragile art installation, not touching until the cordon is lowered and the curator says it is safe. She handed him a paper cup. "They're good together," she said. "They are," he replied. He thought of his mother, of Lauren, of the hidden letters, and of the lie that had kept a chapter locked away. He did not blame his family for wanting to keep him safe. He simply saw how safety could calcify into avoidance. He had been the one who refused to let the lie stand, not because he sought punishment, but because he could not remain comfortable while someone else carried a truth he now knew was his to share. Marcus came over at halftime and leaned on the bench, breathless and alive. "Dad," he said, careful, testing. The word felt new in his mouth. "Yeah?" Nathan answered. "Thanks for coming," Marcus said. It was a small thing. It landed as a gift. Later that night, as they walked to the car, Nathan thought about success. He had always defined it in terms that were measurable. Deals, titles, a tidy corner office. Those measures still had their place. They did not, he realized, make the ledger of his life balanced. Presence did. Accountability did. He had swapped time for convenience for years, and now understood the cost. He accepted it without theatrical repentance, with practical acts and patient attention. There were days he failed. There were other afternoons when Marcus pulled away, and Nathan had to learn to accept that trust is an accrual, not an entitlement. There were moments of clumsiness, old jokes that fell flat, attempts to bridge a gap with a gift that felt like purchase rather than penance. Each misstep required a different humility, apology, correction, and the repetition of being present. Over time, those repetitions began to look like steady growth rather than a series of stumbles. He also learned to measure success differently. The first time Marcus called him on his own, not to arrange a meeting, but to ask about an application detail, Nathan felt a sharp, uncomplicated joy. He did not mark it with an internal trophy. He filed it away with the small victories, a shared joke, an honest conversation, a drive that turned into a memory. The lie that had been the story for so long did not dissolve because he wanted it to. It unraveled as people acted differently, as omissions were replaced by acknowledgements, as time was spent instead of accounts paid. Nathan watched as his mother grew into a quieter acceptance, as Lauren stopped making excuses and started making space. Emma, too, allowed a cautious thaw, not because Nathan performed grand gestures, but because he showed up when it mattered. On a calm afternoon months later, Nathan found himself in a kitchen he had previously occupied alone, watching Marcus and Oliver make grilled cheese with the authoritative chaos of teenagers who think they know everything. There was cheese on the floor. There were laughing accusations. Nathan felt the neatness of his former life yielding to something richer and less predictable. He thought of the title the world might give him: successful consultant, good provider, a man who had it together. He set that aside. The work of being a father, messy, ongoing, was a different kind of success, one without immediate metrics and with an appetite for daily labor. He could not undo the years of absence with a single confession or a single check. He had to live differently. The boys left the kitchen in a flurry to find a ball. Nathan washed a dish and felt in the ordinary rhythmic motion a kind of calm. Outside, their voices carried across the yard. He stood at the doorway, the sunlight catching the dust motes, and allowed himself to believe that he had chosen correctly by rejecting the lie everyone had accepted. He had not wished to punish his family for their choices. He had chosen instead to trade the comfort of a myth for the harder work of truth and presence. If you enjoy true-to-life stories about second chances, subscribe. They had no illusions about the future. There would be setbacks. There would be days when Marcus closed the door and did not return a call. There would be times when his mother's old instincts crept back in, and she would argue for the neat solutions of the past. But the trajectory had changed. Nathan had learned to let presence be the metric he measured his life by. At the end of the afternoon, as the boys tired and sat on the curb, counting missed shots and deciding who had been the better player, Nathan sat with Emma on the steps and watched. The ball rolled between their feet. Marcus called a joke toward Oliver. Oliver responded with a ridiculous imprecation. Nathan felt a warmth that was not triumph, but a quiet acknowledgement. "You did the work," Emma said softly. "No," he replied. "I'm doing it." She nodded. There was acceptance in that sentence, and also the gentle reality that being a father was a verb, not a state. As dusk settled, Nathan thought of the lie, how easy it had been for people to believe that absence did not matter, that time could be edited away. He thought about how he had once measured himself by the wrong scoreboard. He had let others' protective instincts become a barrier. He would spend the rest of this life working to be present enough to matter. He walked the boys to the car. Marcus offered a reluctant, real smile. Oliver leaned in to show his new move. Nathan lifted his mouth in a small smile, one he had practiced in a mirror and found imperfect in practice but honest. He knew the road ahead was long. He knew the work of repair would not be a single arc of redemption, but an accumulation of steady days. When he closed the car door and watched them drive away, Nathan felt a kind of tired contentment. Presence was not glamorous. It was not newsworthy. It was quiet, stubborn, and necessary. If you have a second-chance story, small or large, share it below. Tell us how someone showed up when it mattered. If this story resonated, like and share so someone else might find courage to choose presence over the comfortable lie.